So Ryan, I've actually got a second window up. You guys can't see it, but I've got a screen behind the screen right now, so I can actually monitor the YouTube if there's any comments once it goes live. Which we
Great.
you now.
Ryan, if you'd like to invite let in the attendee. Still have one.
And Simran, I'll go ahead and add. It looks as if Ryan has started the live stream. If we want to go ahead and get started.
Get started?
Yep.
Sounds good. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Simran Malhotra, and I'm a principal with Remy & Associates. We are a planning and urban design firm with extensive experience working in communities all over California and along the West Coast. We've been retained by the City of Campbell to prepare objective standards for residential development. Please note this meeting is being live streamed on the city's YouTube channel and is also being recorded. I would like to introduce the city staff and the Remy team who are here today. We have Paul Kermoyan, Community Development Director, Stephen Rose, Senior Planner, and Ryan Vila, who's helping out with the logistics for Zoom and the YouTube streaming as IT administrator. And from our Remy team, we have Alessandra Lundin, who's a senior planner, and Jeremy Pai, who's the intermediate planner. And you'll hear from all three of us today during this meeting. Now I'd like to turn it over to Stephen for some welcome remarks and providing some background on why this project.
Thank you. And first and foremost, good evening, and thank you for everyone who's able to make it. I see that we have a light attendance tonight, but hopefully more members of the public will be able to catch this after the fact on YouTube or watching it on the city's website. As just noted, my name is Stephen Rose. I'm one of the city planners for the City of Campbell. Recognizing this is our first community workshop, I wanted to start by providing an overview of the purpose of tonight's meeting, as well as a brief background of the actions leading up to tonight. So over the past few years, changes to state law, primarily the Housing Accountability Act, have required the city to change the way it processes housing development applications. The changes to state law are intended to provide greater certainty for developers and make it difficult for the city to deny or reduce the density of residential projects which meet objective standards. While the city has the city has development standards which govern the height, size, and setback of buildings in most situations, the decision-making body has historically retained broad discretionary authority to decide whether or not a project should be approved, even when satisfying those standards, based on subjective policies such as whether or not the project fits in with the character or scale of the neighborhood. Since a great deal of city documents contain subjective language, over the last year, the planning department has held 3 meetings with the city council to receive direction on the scope, approach, and schedule to proceed with the objective standards update, which will be covered in greater detail briefly. Remy & Associates, as just noted, was selected to assist the city with the update based on the unique experience in preparing codes and standards and their track record of successful community engagement. And with that said, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Simran Malhotra, one of the principals at Remy.
Thank you, Stephen. Before we get started, I want to just go over some of the Zoom tools that are at our disposal today. Since this is a webinar, all attendees are muted by default. If you have a question, please raise your hand. using the tool at the bottom of your screen. Excuse me, right here. Right here. If you've called in, press *9 to raise your hand. When called upon, please unmute yourself and mute when done speaking. Press *6 if you're participating by phone to unmute. You may also turn on your cameras when you're called on to speak. Please limit background noise when you speak, and also please note that you can chat hosts for any issues. You can also ask a question in writing using the Q&A feature, which is shown at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to provide a verbal or written response to all questions as we go through this presentation. So let's get started. We are here today to introduce the project, provide an overview of why this is needed and what is included. We will also provide an overview of the project approach and timeline, and we'll stop along the way to allow for questions. We will also ask you to provide input using the poll feature. And speaking of poll features, I will turn it over to Jeremy to ask the first set of poll questions. But before I do that, I also want to note that at the end of the meeting, we have an opportunity for taking the survey that's live right now, and also to win a door prize through the raffle. Jeremy.
Thank you, Simran. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Pai, and I am an intermediate planner with RAMI. We would like to get this evening started with some icebreaker questions for those of you who are participating on YouTube or potentially watching this recording at a later date. There will be opportunities to hear feedback from you through this survey, which we will talk a little bit about later. To get things started, we wanted to start with a very simple question of just asking participants to this meeting where you live. Are you native to Campbell? Do you work in the area? Are you living close by, perhaps in San Jose or somewhere else? We'll give people a few moments to respond.
Jeremy, I think everyone has voted.
Okay.
And I'll just add, just because we are kind of light on attendance tonight, I think it might be valuable to add some of these survey questions at a later date and time to what we do also have a dedicated website, so we can add a couple of these polling questions there as well for people who'd like to provide responses.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, thank you very much. It seems like San Tomas is represented at tonight's evening, but yeah, we look forward to hearing more from hopefully other residents in Campbell. Before we move on to the next portion of the presentation, we did want to hear a little bit about how you are joining us this evening. If you have been reached through email blasts or have heard about this from someone else, some information to let us know how best to send you information in the future would be really helpful to the project team.
Wonderful.
All right, well, thank you very much. So it seems like email has given us quite a bit of success, and moving forward, we will make sure to try to keep everyone informed through as many platforms as possible. I will remind that in the chat right now is a link to the project website, which is hosted by the City of Campbell. You'll be able to find some information there, and we will continue to be sharing updates periodically through the website, as well as email blasts and a few other venues. So thank you very much for participating. And with that, that will conclude the first part of the polling questions. I will pass it on to Stephen, who will be sharing a little bit about the project, and Simran, who will be weighing in as well.
Actually, I'll take it from here, Jeremy. Thank you.
Jeremy, did you say there is a link in the chat?
Yes, I will send it out again in case that is not showing up properly for you. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Okay, so what is the Objective Standards Project? This project will establish objective development and design standards for all residential projects. As you all know, the state of California has passed significant legislation over the past several years with the goal of expediting the production of housing in California. And they've come at it in two ways. One is by requiring objective standards for all residential projects, and two, by requiring jurisdictions to streamline and prevent delays in project review and permitting. While the state laws apply to projects with more than one residential unit, this project will apply to all residential projects. And the reason for that is to ensure that this comprehensive approach will provide consistency and clarity in the review and permitting process. It'll also allow for addressing the design of new development in a context-sensitive manner, given that the city is predominantly single-family residential. By including single-family homes with or without ADUs or accessory dwelling units will be one way to ensure that there is context-appropriate and high-quality design within the city. What this project will not do is change what's already established in the current city regulations. So our focus will be on revising city regulations. We'll provide clarifying details and remove subjective language. We will not be introducing new standards or regulations that will change established standards such as setbacks, building heights, or densities. Objective standards will apply to both new constructions as well as additions or alterations to existing residential projects. And as noted earlier, these will include single-family, multifamily, and mixed-use developments. The projects, mixed-use development projects, which include more than 2/3 as residential, qualify for objective standards and the expedited approvals. State law does provide some exceptions to this requirement for objective standards and streamlined review. And the major exceptions are, one, if a project requests a variance, a general plan, community plan, or zoning amendment. A variance is a request for exceptions to standards that are already in place. An example of this would be for a project proponent to be requesting reduced setbacks or changes to parking requirements based on their project needs. Since that is a discretionary request, the city is able to deny. City Council is able to deny that request if they so choose. Another example is if a project would cause significant health and safety impacts. An example of a health and safety impact would be noise. It is not enough for a city to deny a project just by stating that it would create noise impacts. The city needs to have already established clear and quantifiable standards that establish what the noise threshold is. In other words, you can't create thresholds for environmental significance after the fact. Those need to have been established in advance, and they need to be quantifiable, and they need to be clear and objective. Yet another exception is for buildings with projects with a historic designation. In this case, there's subjective review related to the Secretary of Interior standards which apply. The second set of requirements of state laws are related to project approvals. The Housing Accountability Act, or HAA, was originally adopted to encourage the production of housing, and that this law has been amended. The amendment states that if a project complies with objective general plan, zoning, and subdivision standards and criteria, then The city can only reduce or deny the project if there's a specific adverse impact to public health and safety that cannot be mitigated in another way. This law further states that this impact must be significant, it must be quantifiable, and direct and unavoidable based on these objective criteria that have been established. In addition, the burden is on the city to demonstrate that the project is not consistent with the objective standards. These new state laws have also imposed time limits within which cities are required to review projects, and these are dependent on the number of units. So if a project is less than 150 units, city has 60 days and 90 days if it's more than that. If the timeline is not met, projects are legally deemed consistent. Additionally, there are other legal burdens regarding approval. And the summary on that is that it'll be very hard for communities to deny or delay projects as long as they meet the objective standards that are in place. And as noted earlier, there are some exceptions, such as when a project requests a variance or a general plan or zoning amendment. So what are the documents that are being updated? As a part of this project, we will be updating several sections of the zoning code, and these include definitions, ADU and PD ordinance, and the permits and procedures sections. And the 3 citywide residential guideline documents will also be updated. As Stephen noted earlier, the plan development ordinance will move on an expedited time frame. And the 7 area plans listed on the slide here will also be updated. And these cover about half the city and include a range of residential types and densities. These documents contain some development standards as well as design guidance for residential projects to varying degrees. And will not only address the subjective guidelines, but also ensure that there's consistency between these documents and the zoning code. And with that, let's pause for some questions. Alessandra, are there any questions?
Yes. So far, it just looks like we have one question about the possibility of getting a copy of the slides after the presentation. And I think that wouldn't be an issue. I think we could post a copy to the project website.
Great. Any other questions? Go ahead, Raja.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think it's about the last slide. You mentioned the list of documents that will be updated, right?
That's right.
So it said, the ADU document is also might be updated.
Correct.
So how, do you folks come up with the list of documents that will be updated, or the city came up with the documents that needs to be updated?
The list was originally developed by the city, and then during the finalization of the scope, we coordinated on what list is included. And Stephen, I think you'd like to add something here?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and just mention what we're targeting is development standards and area plans which have residential projects involved. Because again, the state legislature, the changes to state law are areas which involve residential projects. So yeah, I mean, ADUs is an example of a standard which involves residential, so that's why it was included. So it goes with the rest of the list that you see on the screen.
Okay, so there is no specific criteria on, these good documents got selected because of this. These are all the documents that cover anything related to residential in the city.
I would say
for the most part, yes, you're correct.
Yes, correct.
You're correct.
Okay. Yeah. If there was any parametric data on why these documents were selected to be updated, I just wanted to know if to get that parametric data. So.
Sure. And in addition, ADUs, for example, is one of those areas of housing that the state has passed for the last several years. They've passed a series of laws related to ADUs, what's permitted, what's not, what discretion cities have in approving or denying a project. What fees can be charged, impact fees can be charged, etc. So for that reason, the city wanted to make sure that we took a look at the current ordinance and made sure that it was consistent with the latest state laws.
Yeah, I mean, I have been actively working with the city ADU stuff for a while with Daniel Farmer, and the ADU law was passed after the state ADU of the city was passed after the state law was passed. And in fact, Campbell was the first city to update it to the standard. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was surprised to see the ADU again, because I thought at least the ADU document was like very objective. It gave exact numbers, even including setbacks and stuff.
Yeah. If I could just jump in, Simran. Hi, Raja. Paul Kermoyan here. Good to talk to you again. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we knew that we were going to have to create objective standards when we were preparing the ordinance for the ADU, and your contributions helped shape that, and we tried to make it as objective as possible. So I think if you look at this project and why we've hired this consulting firm is that if you, I mean, you've looked at our code, you've looked at our general plan. If you see anything in our development standards that you feel are vague, that's what we're going to be trying to address. Anything that's very clear and objective remains the same. So that's a simplistic way of looking at what we're trying to do.
Yeah, got that. Yeah, I understood that from Simran's comment. I just want to make sure what was the criteria of selecting the documents, and both Stephen and Simran were very clear on explaining that. Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the next phase. And this section describes what the law states objective standards are. So there is a definition in the government code, and it states that an objective standard is a standard that involves no personal or subjective judgment by a public official. These standards must be clear, such that both an applicant and the public official understand these to mean the same. Most regulatory documents have development standards and design guidelines. Most development standards are objective, and these are often numeric. These include maximum heights, minimum setbacks, densities, etc. However, most cities, and this is evidenced in some of the area plans here and the standalone guideline documents, there are qualitative design guidelines, and these are generally subjective in nature. And it is often confusing for folks to understand whether a regulation is objective or subjective. And the goal, as Paul just mentioned, is to make sure that if a regulation is unclear or it's there needs to be a judgment call that needs to be made, those are the regulations that we'll be modifying to make objective. So we have another poll question for you. So let's run that. Jeremy?
Great. To follow up our introduction to objective standards, we have a few questions that will give you an idea of the type of work that we will be engaging with more thoroughly over the next few months. So we would like to ask you a question that has, for those of you who are on the recording who are not able to immediately join us tonight, I understand that you won't be able to participate in the polling exercise, so I will reference again the opportunity for you to participate and get involved through the survey, for which the information is available on our website. Okay, So the first question then that is being asked this evening is whether the following statement is objective. Fences and walls should be constructed of high quality and durable materials. And based on the poll results that we received, we find that no, this objective is not in fact, or this statement is not in fact objective. And we will have a couple of subsequent following slides to further explain this.
So Roger, yes, you guessed right. The statement in the red box on the left, fences and walls should be constructed of high quality durable materials. This statement leads to a lot of interpretation. You know, the use of the word should implies that this is optional. Also, what does high quality or durable mean? The standard in the green box on the right provides clear direction. These are requirements. You must do this. And it is very clear in stating which materials are permitted and which are prohibited. So that makes the standard on the right objective. Here's another example. The standard, the non-objective statement on the left states, provide articulation to reduce the apparent mass and scale of the building and to be sensitive to the neighborhood. This statement is subjective because what does reduce mass mean? How do you define sensitivity to a neighborhood? The statement in the green box does this objectively. So first it addresses articulation, and it says, for every 100 feet of building length, there shall be a plain break along the facade comprised of an offset of at least 5 feet in the depth of 25 feet in length. And then it states that it needs to extend from grade to the highest story. What makes this objective is that there's a clear dimension that a project is supposed to meet. And someone evaluating the project can easily state, yes, this happens, this is occurring in the project or not. That makes it objective. One would also need to add a second standard about detailing and sensitivity to the neighborhood. So what we've also find in our review of these documents is that for every design guidelines, you may need more than one standard to ensure that it is, the objective nature of it is correctly encapsulated. Let's run another poll question, Jeremy.
All right, thank you, Simran. So following that brief explanation in terms of distinguishing non-objective from objective standards, we would like to test out the following statement. Blank walls, facade defined as facades without doors, windows, landscaping, or treatment, should be less than 30 feet in length along sidewalks, pedestrian walks, or publicly accessible outdoor space areas. Is this an example of an objective statement? All right, thank you.
Okay.
So with this example, looks like the response to this is that yes, this statement is in fact objective. We will provide a couple more insight on this particular question in the following slides. But before we conclude, we want to provide one more example. So with this last example, we would like to ask again, is this an example of an objective statement? For each common outdoor space provided, a minimum 15-foot dimension is required in either direction, with a minimum area of at least 300 square feet. Is this statement objective or non-objective? All right, thank you for participating. So it seems like in this case, it is not in fact an objective standard. And I will pass it to Simran to walk us through these two particular examples.
Thank you, Jeremy. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay. So the first question was blank walls should be less than 30 feet in length along sidewalks, pedestrian walks, or publicly accessible outdoor space areas. This is actually a subjective statement, and there's a trick to that, that it uses the word should. And that's the tricky part. That makes it optional, which makes it subjective. So it is up to the project applicant to decide whether they provide, whether they limit the length of blank walls to less than 30 feet or not. The second statement, again, is quantified, and it is required. It says you must do this, and then it identifies the total area that's required and the minimum dimension in each direction. So that makes it an objective statement. So a plan, someone checking the plan can easily establish whether the standard is being met or not. And there's no confusion about that. So as we develop objective standards, we need to understand that there will be a trade-off between allowing flexibility and creativity, which leads to less certainty in design. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's increased design control with improved certainty and level of specificity. Now, let me give you a couple of examples for that. So in this example, if you look at the standard on the right, it says only use colors from an approved color palette. So in that case, there's a limited list of colors that are allowed, and a project applicant may only use a color from that palette. That is very specific, and that gives a lot of certainty as to what would be permitted and what would be what the color of a building might be. The standard on the left, is more flexible. It only prohibits certain color families and allows all other colors. So that gives more discretion to the project proponent and applicants, while limiting only the most egregious color choices. So there's less certainty in design, more flexibility and creativity for the project proponent, but on one hand, and then on the other one, it's very limiting as to what colors are permitted. Another example is for this is what's on the screen here. The example on the right says each building shall provide balconies and individual entries. That's very specific. That means every unit will have balconies and individual entries, and all the ground floor units must have patios. The example on the left gives a project applicant some flexibility in terms of what elements they provide, and there's a list of documents, and they have to provide a minimum of 2. So based on the design requirements and other considerations, the project applicant can choose which of these features are incorporated in the project. And from a city's perspective, with any 2 features, the goal of or the intent of this standard is met. So, this spectrum is important for us to get an understanding of where the community feels the objective standards we are creating should lie along the spectrum. And in the survey, there are several questions which get to this as well. So those who are on YouTube And attendees who haven't taken the survey yet, when you take the survey, that will allow give us that feedback and influence the direction of this project. So in summary, what objective standards do is to eliminate subjectivity and personal judgment by providing clear language. They also encourage streamlined and transparent approval processes. The applicant and the public officials all understand what are the standards to meet and what the approval process is. They also discourage bad design by regulating site configurations, building design, and other design considerations. And finally, they protect the city from legal challenges for wrongful denial of housing projects. What this project doesn't do, and I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, is that the project will not modify or contradict existing land use or zoning designations as included in the general plan or the zoning code. And then we should also note that not all guidelines can be converted to objective standards. So there will be some that will need to be removed from the various documents. As I noted earlier, state laws require streamlining of permits and procedures to allow for faster production of housing. These laws, primarily through the Housing Accountability Act, require more ministerial approvals for projects that meet objective standards. Some discretionary review is, of course, permitted for certain kinds of projects. As I mentioned earlier, those requesting variances or general plan or zoning code amendments. These laws also limit the amount of time cities have to review an application for completeness, and cities only get one chance in asking for additional documentation when a application has been submitted. Once a project has been deemed complete, there are time limits that need to be met for approval. There are also other new requirements, and these state that development fees that are in place at the time of application submittal may not be increased during the review process. And similarly, the objective standards that are in place at the time of application submittal will apply for that project, even if these are updated. And now let me briefly describe the project timeline and the various the planning process that we have outlined. We have a four-step process. The first phase included our initial review of the documents that I mentioned earlier in the presentation and the identification of issues and where changes are needed. We are now in phase 2, where we are establishing a direction on how to make these changes. The City Council gave us direction on October 6th, and we are now providing the opportunity for the public to learn about the project and give us feedback through a community survey about your priorities and preferences. And we'll be going to the Planning Commission to get their input on November 24th. Phase 3 of this project will involve the actual drafting of the changes to the documents and then preparation of supporting graphics and visual simulations. These draft documents will be released for public review and Planning Commission and City Council feedback. And after incorporation of any changes, we expect the project to be ready for adoption next spring. There are several opportunities for the community to provide their input. And there are 2 workshops, the first one today as a webinar, and the second when we present the public draft. We also have a community survey that's ongoing that gets feedback from the community about your priorities and preferences. And then besides these 2 workshops, the public is encouraged to attend and provide additional input at the Planning Commission and City Council study sessions and hearings. And with that, I'll pause again for any questions. Alessandra, are there any?
Hey, Simran,
There are no, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You said the poll is open, right?
The survey is
The
open,
survey.
correct?
Okay, so
Yes.
is it on the Objective Standards website or something?
Yeah. Oops, sorry.
Go ahead,
Let me.
Alessandra.
I'll copy the link back into the chat again. Hopefully, you can see it.
Got it. I think it's on the website too. Thank you.
Okay.
We encourage you to take the survey right now. And while you're doing that, I'll note that the purpose of the survey is to collect input on priorities, desires, and concerns about the design of residential projects, and to help us better understand the level of control, specificity, or flexibility that should be considered for future residential development.
I'll also mention Raja as our star attendee tonight. I also emailed you a copy of all the slides. We're kind of rounding out the presentation now as well. So you'll find those in your email.
Thank you. I was hoping there will be more people, and I'm surprised they're not. So.
Tell your friends
Yeah.
and neighbors.
So we'll be posting a recording of the meeting on the project website, and it'll also be on the city's YouTube channel. So those who weren't able to make it today can go watch the presentation and learn more about the project in either of those two locations. So if you can help spread the word, that would be greatly appreciated. And the community can also provide their thoughts through the survey. So that's open through November 2nd. So we have another 10 days or so. So we'd like to get as much input as we can. So if you can help spread the word for that, we would love that.
So Raja, this delay, we're essentially just waiting for attendees. I mean, the way we structured this meeting, we had planned on a few more in attendance, was just to solicit community feedback and try to encourage people who attended the meeting to click on that link, thesurveymonkey.com, and go ahead and complete that.
Oh, finish the survey. So
Yeah, I mean, seeing as you're the only, seeing as you're the only attendee tonight, I think that we can just recognize your attendance tonight. I don't think we necessarily need to have you complete the survey at this very moment, but we would definitely encourage you to do it, because we have we had a raffle prize in mind, and you being our star attendee, I think we'll just go ahead and appoint you the prize, which is a lovely water bottle, a USB charging unit with Campbell branding on it, and a few other things, as well as a little notepad folio, I think is the technical term of that. So anytime you want to stop by City Hall, Raja would be happy to give that to you.
Thanks, Stephen. I don't know how to respond to that, so thank you.
Yeah, we had this cool spinning wheel to pick a winner, but I don't think it works with one name in it. So
Yes.
so as Stephen noted, we'll award the prize to you, and appreciate your attending today and providing us with your input.
Quick thing, I'm going through the survey, and if I'm not wrong, like under every picture, there is this question of which of these key characteristics are the most important to ensure compatibility. Is that like supposed to be a specific question for each of those images?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought, are these like duplicate or general? Okay, got it.
Yeah, so the idea behind some of the survey questions is really solicit your opinion. What's standing out to you when you look at that?
Got it.
And with that, Simran, I don't know if we want to go ahead and adjourn the meeting for the evening, and just thank everybody who watches this video, hopefully later at some other date and time.
Yes. On the screen is the project website is noted, as well as Stephen's direct email. So if there are additional questions or comments, feel free to share those with Stephen. You can also do that through the survey. There's a portion at the end to provide additional feedback. And with
Thank you, Simran. Thank you, Alessandra, Jeremy, Stephen. Good job. Thanks, Raja, for attending. Tell your friends. We need public involvement as we shape these standards.
Yeah, I thought the whole St. Thomas stack people will be here, and I'm surprised. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank you again
Thank you
very
for
much.
attending.
Have a good night.
Okay. Recording
We're
has
still
stopped.
live